Good morning. Welcome back to the Planet Doug podcast for Monday, January 6, 2025. It's funny, I was wondering how many times have I accidentally written 2024, because everybody does that the first week of a new year. And I've done it a lot because with all of my videos and my new Planet Doug Patreon, things like that, I'm constantly labeling folders because I shoot some video. I want to save it in a folder and I label it with the date. And I'm always writing 2024 because I've done it so many times in the year 2024. And even for this podcast, I was making a note about it. And then I was going to write down the date and I instinctively wrote 2024. My brain and my fingers just automatically do that. But it is 2025, the first week of 2025. I'm still in Indonesia, still in the town of Tanjung Balai. In fact, still in the Malahayati Hotel in Tanjung Balai, room 219, up on the second floor. The roar of the traffic coming in from the outside. I'm pretty comfortable here. The one problem with this room I've talked about is it doesn't really get any usable Wi-Fi. I can occasionally get a little bit of a signal where like a notification will get through or something like that. But to do any kind of web surfing, anything at all on the internet, video uploading, obviously downloading anything, then I have to use data. So I'm constantly making trips across the road. There's a little stall over there where you can buy what they call pulsa. So I keep having to buy more pulsa, which is credit for my smartphone. And once I have pulsa on my phone, I can use that pulsa to buy data packages and use it up and then constantly buying more. So it ends up working out and it's not that expensive. It's just a constant. You have to keep monitoring how much data you have left and when it is going to run out. And here there's been a major shift in the weather, which has been interesting. It was raining a lot when I was here the last couple of months. Tons and tons of rain. I guess it was the rainy season. I haven't checked the internet for any information about this, but I'm assuming the rainy season is now open and we are dealing with the hot season beginning because now it is so humid out there. It's incredible. I just go outside, sit down at a little outdoor restaurant from one of my regular meals, and I'm just like drenched in sweat so quickly. So yeah, it's always something interesting about the weather. We always want it to change. If it's raining every day, all day long, you think, I wish the rain would go away. But as soon as the rain goes away, of course, the cool weather goes away with it, and suddenly you're just baking in the heat and humidity. So in a place like Sumatra, for someone like me, you can never win in terms of the weather. The big news and big events in my life right now, of course, are all based on Patreon. I put together an announcement video to put on Planet Doug saying that I've made a Patreon and this is how it works, this is what it is, just telling people about it. And I decided at the last minute to make it a premiere. So there's actually going to be, that video is going to be shown as a premiere this Wednesday night. This is Monday morning. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Feels like maybe I picked a date too far in the future. It's not that big a deal. The video itself is just me on the roof of this hotel talking about Patreon. So it's not like an exciting video, but I thought by making it a premiere, I can build up to it, talk to people about it in advance, and I can make more announcements. So one thing I have to figure out what to do is I have a lot of content on Patreon that isn't public on YouTube. So for example, I have a whole bunch of these podcasts that in fact nobody knows about because I've recorded them, edited them, uploaded them, but I kept them as part of Patreon. So they were never posted publicly to Behind the Scenes or Planet Doug or anywhere. And I guess in my mind, what I wanted to do was have a whole bunch of content on Patreon waiting for people so that they know what it's all about. And I thought people would go back in time and discover this content. But that's probably not going to happen. But also, these videos are set to unlisted on YouTube. And now that the Patreon is public, they should be set to public. So they're suddenly going to appear on my YouTube channels as public videos. But how do I handle that? Do I do them one at a time every day, change one of them from unlisted to public and gradually do it, or do them all at once? Turn off notifications, because there could be as many as, I don't know, 30 or 40 videos. And if you make all of those public, people will get like 40 notifications. And that's, that's a bit annoying. So I could also just make them public, but turn off notifications. I haven't really thought that through yet. I'll figure that out. I haven't done a YouTube premiere in a long time. The way that works is the video is announced in advance, and then the whole idea of a premiere is that I will be watching the video at the same time as it's being played for the first time. It's like a grand opening of a movie sort of thing, and then there's a chat window. So I'll be watching the video, and then people can chat with me in the chat window while the video is playing. So it should be a more exciting video than an announcement video, but I thought it'd be interesting. And I thought, like today on the community tab on YouTube, on Planet Doug, I will actually take one of the bonus videos from Patreon and then post it, and then have a link to it and say, this is the type of content that you find on Patreon. And I'll do one or two of them today, one or two of them tomorrow, one or two of them on Wednesday, and that will be leading up to the premiere. And interestingly, with the premiere, there's actually a video post announcing it, and the chat window is already open, which I learned how to do that when I did premieres back in Thailand. I haven't done any since Thailand, I don't think. And then people can leave comments there, and the one comment that somebody left, or one comment somebody left somewhere was, I have no idea what Patreon is, and I'm too lazy to Google it, so I'll just wait for the video and you can tell me. Which is one of the realizations I had as I was building up to this Patreon announcement, is that there might be a lot of people out there that don't even know what Patreon is, have never heard of it, and even if they've heard of it, don't know what it is. And to be honest, that was kind of a late realization for me, because as a YouTuber and as someone who's online all the time, to me, it's common knowledge. When I'm talking to other people who have YouTube channels, they're always talking about Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, all these various platforms that you can integrate with your YouTube channel, YouTube memberships, things like that. We're always talking about them, so I just figure it's common knowledge. But for a lot of people, yeah, I mean, they may watch YouTube videos, but they have no reason to ever hear about Patreon. And if they ever did hear about it, they have no reason to go look into it. It has no value for them. So that is something I think about. I noticed when I did my initial research on Patreon, there was a lot of feedback from other people who had Patreons who basically talked about giving up on it because it didn't work for them, and it involved so much extra work, but there was no feedback that they were posting all this content to Patreon, but then it seemed like nobody was looking at any of it. Nobody was leaving comments, nobody was interacting with any of it. So they were suddenly working in a vacuum on this website called Patreon, doing all these things there, but it seemed like nobody was aware of it. And I do wonder whether I will run into that situation as well. But I've taken a different approach to Patreon from most people. I put a lot of work into it, and I've made it a lot bigger and more elaborate than the average person, with a lot more different types of content. And I also have the advantage, as I talked about in the announcement video, that I kind of need an outlet. that if I have some sort of a random thought in my head, I like to share these thoughts, pictures, anything like that. And then, so even if there is not a lot of engagement on Patreon, I don't need a lot of engagement. I don't even need any engagement, because in the past, let's say I had a random thought, like I just talked about the weather here. It's sudden, the rainy season is over and now we're in the hot season. That's a random thought I have. Normally I would go onto WhatsApp, contact a friend and say, oh, wow, it's so hot here in Indonesia. Just a simple chatting with a friend. So in that case, or I might take a picture. Yesterday or a couple of days ago, I had a slice of pizza from a little place across the street here. And that pizza was kind of weird and kind of interesting. And so I took a picture of it, and then normally I would post that picture to something like Facebook or send it to a friend on WhatsApp and say, oh, wow, I just had this local pizza, and tell the story. And then I'm doing all that work, posting a picture, writing about it, sending it, and I'm doing all of that work to send it to one person. So if I'm willing to do all of that work to send it to one person, a friend of mine on the other side of the world who probably doesn't even care about it, then why not post it to Patreon? And then if even 2 people look at it on Patreon, well, that's more than would have looked at it if I sent it as a personal message. So for me, even 2 people, 3 people, that's more than would normally happen. So that's kind of how I think about it. So in building up to the Patreon announcement, I've also been thinking about going back in time. I have this feature on Patreon called Time Capsule. And the idea with the time capsule is that I would go back into my journal and find an interesting post, something I wrote when I was in another country at some point in my lifetime, years ago or decades ago. And if it's a little interesting story, I will post it to Patreon with the date that I wrote it, and that will be part of the time capsule. It's like, oh, here's something I wrote in 1998 when I was in Canada, or something like that. But I have other pieces of writing that are much bigger than that. So for example, if I went on a trip, I would keep a journal on that trip, and the journal might be quite large. It could even end up being hundreds of pages long. Like if you put it together as a normal paperback book, it would be a 300 or 400 page book. And so what I was thinking is I could also take those journals and package them like an ebook almost. You can do that on Patreon, where you take all of your journal entries, post them to Patreon individually, but you pull them all together as a collection, and then you make that one unit, one collection, call it. I went to Palawan, for example, in the Philippines 2 times. I went there on a bike trip, and then I went there on a motorcycle trip, and I kept a journal on both occasions. So I could take my bicycle trip journal, post it as a collection, and then on Patreon you can put a little price tag on it. You could say, this ebook is for sale on my Patreon for $1 or $5 or $10, whatever it is you want to ask for it. So that's what I've been working on the last week or so. So I've gone into I started off with the journal that I kept when I was on a motorbike in Palawan. That was the very first one. It's a relatively shorter one. Trying to work out all the ins and outs, like how can I do this? How does it work? And that was an interesting experience to reread that journal. And one thing I commented on Patreon, how bad my memory is. And that comment on Patreon, that memory post, was because of this Philippines journal, because there were so many things in that journal that I was writing about that I have no memory of at all. Even really interesting, magical, big things. When I made the Patreon post, I was writing about a time when I was sitting on the beach watching a sunset, and a monkey came running along the beach and then jumped onto my head, sat on my head, and then the monkey kept leaving, but then it would come back and then sit on my shoulder and wrap its arms around my neck, and it sat in my lap. And how many times in your life does that happen to you? It's the only time it has ever happened to me in my life that a monkey has spent that much time with me as a friendly animal, and I got to interact with it. So you'd think I'd remember that. It would be a clear memory, but I have no memory of it at all. I have the whole story written out in my journal, but I don't remember it happening. And I went through my journal from Cambodia as well. I went to Cambodia on a cycling trip, and there was one point in the trip when I met a couple. I think they were American, a man and a woman, an American couple. And we spent a lot of time together. I think I met them in Sihanoukville, and we spent a lot of time together there, meals together, coffees together, evenings, drinking and talking. And then we all got on the same plane from there. I was running out of time, so instead of riding my bike, I flew from Sihanoukville to Siem Reap, and then I spent time in Siem Reap, went to Angkor Wat, did all that sort of thing. And while I was there, this American couple, we went on the same plane, showed up at the airport together, flew on the plane together, went to either the same hotel in Siem Reap or neighboring hotels, had lots of meals together, lots more conversations. So these are two people that I had a big experience with, met many, many times, had long conversations with, had many meals with them, and I have no memory of them at all. I don't remember any of this happening. I don't remember any of our conversations. I don't have any pictures of them, so I don't remember what they looked like. I don't remember. All I have is the story that I wrote in my journal. I have nothing in my brain. I just don't, I don't remember it at all. So that has been kind of interesting. And reading my journals from these bike trips is sort of, it's kind of painful in a way, because when I went on the trip to Cambodia and the bike trip to Palawan, both times, was it both times? Yeah, both times I didn't have my real bike. My real bicycle, I'd sort of left it behind in Canada. It was sort of in storage in Canada. And I was living in Taiwan. I was living in Taiwan at the time. And while I was in Taiwan, I bought a city bike, just your basic bicycle to ride around the city. And I took those bicycles to Cambodia and to the Philippines. And man, what a disaster that was, because they're not strong enough. They're not touring bicycles. And I had endless problems with flat tires, with the rear derailleur, the front derailleur, with the headset, with the crankset. Everything was a problem on those bikes. It was just, I thought of myself at that time as a relatively experienced cyclist, but both of those trips were dominated by problems with my bicycle. And that's quite embarrassing for me, because I'm supposed to be relatively experienced at it. And based on those two trips and those journals, it was just a disaster. I was like a complete amateur, a complete beginner. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I have a reason to I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to YouTube stories. The first video I wanted to talk about was the video from the YouTube channel We Hate the Cold. And this is a UK travel vlogger. I've talked about him quite a bit already. And he set off to ride his scooter from Thailand all the way back to his home in the UK. And then in Vietnam, he turns out he tried to ride his scooter into Vietnam, but he was stopped at the border and they wouldn't let him in. He never says why, which I find really frustrating. In terms of the logistics, he doesn't talk a lot about that sort of thing. But he does say briefly that he tried to go into Vietnam on his scooter, but he wasn't allowed to do it. So he went all the way back to Bangkok, but he doesn't talk about that either. So I don't know exactly how that happened. He rode his scooter all the way to the border with Vietnam, so all the way through Cambodia. At the border, they said, no, you can't come in. So then he decided to turn around, ride all the way back through Cambodia, back to Bangkok, put his scooter in storage. Then he went to Decathlon, the cheap sporting goods store, and he bought what he called the second worst bike at Decathlon. And then he bought bags, like pannier bags, camping equipment, all the gear he thought he needed for the bike. And then he turned around and rode the bike all the way back through Cambodia to the border with Vietnam. And then he rode through Vietnam on his bicycle. But he doesn't talk about any of that. Plus, when he did the ride from Bangkok to the border through Cambodia, after all of that on his bike, it took him a week or something like that. He was camping out every night. His memory card was corrupted and he lost all of that video. So he doesn't actually have any of the video from that. He had a little bit he shot on his smartphone, but that's about it. So then his name's Harry, by the way. I remember that now. His name is Harry. So Harry seems like an odd name for a young man today, Harry. Seems like such an old-fashioned kind of name, but maybe it's popular in the UK these days. I don't really know. But anyway, his name is Harry. And he posted one video about Vietnam. So it was like a documentary that talked about his entire trip. So the video is called, let me read this. The video is called 69 Days Cycling Solo from Bangkok to Hanoi. And then, it was like 3,600 kilometers. And I guess he covered that distance in about 2 months, just over 2 months, 70 days. And he posted that whole video. It was like nearly 2 hours long, quite a long video. And then it was flagged by YouTube because he mentioned something in the video. He mentioned these, he's really into history. The theme for his whole trip in Laos and in Vietnam, he's sort of documenting in a casual way the American secret war in Laos and Vietnam, so he's basically talking a lot about the CIA and secret bombing campaigns and army bases and airfields. And then in Vietnam, he branched out into more like the main battles of the Vietnam War. So as he's riding his bike, and when he was on his scooter in Laos, he was visiting all these abandoned airfields, all these places where battles took place and where Americans had set up airfields, things like that. So he was visiting all these places and talking about the history of the Vietnam War, essentially. But as part of that, he talked about the protests against the war in Vietnam. And there was one time when some Buddhist monks set themselves on fire as a protest, and he included that in his video, and then YouTube flagged that as being too sensitive a topic. So his video was restricted and it wasn't promoted, and I think it was hidden on his channel. But he eventually deleted the video, edited that part out, and then re-uploaded it. So I re-watched the whole video. It's an hour and 45 minutes long. And I re-watched the whole thing to see what changes he made. And that's why I say that when I was reading my cycling journals from Cambodia and the Philippines, I was really kind of embarrassed because his experience in Vietnam was very similar to mine. And when I was watching his video, I was thinking, and I talked about this already, that he did everything wrong, because if you're going to go bike touring, you can't use a cheap city bike. They're not strong enough. They're just not going to work. You really want to have a dedicated touring bike, particularly the wheels. You want strong wheels with as many spokes as possible, a big heavy-duty rim, heavy-duty tires and tubes. And I remember when I went to Ethiopia on one of my first big bike trips, I decided to put together the most bomb-proof set of wheels that I possibly could, because I read all these travel books. And in all these travel books, people who were cycling in Africa in particular, all they talked about were flat tires, because there's so many thorns in Africa. And they just got flat tire after flat tire. In one day, they could have 3, 5 flat tires, and it just made their life miserable. So, and they had broken spokes, bent rims, all these things. So I set out to make really strong wheels, including what they call snake bite tubes that are so thick and so heavy that they're basically puncture proof. And then I put Kevlar, like a Kevlar liner around the tubes. And then I had puncture proof tires around that. So I had puncture proof tubes, Kevlar liner, and then puncture proof tires around all of it. So I got no flat tires at all the whole time that I was riding with those wheels. And of course, because the wheels were heavy duty rims, they were actually motorcycle spokes. So I built a bicycle wheel out of motorcycle components. And so I had no broken spokes, nothing like that. And that's what I thought of myself as, that kind of cyclist. And then We Hate the Cold, Harry, I think when he rode from Bangkok to Ho Chi Minh City, I think he had at least, that he mentions, 9 broken spokes on his rear wheel alone. So constantly spokes were breaking, flat tires, broken spoke, flat tires, broken spoke, flat tires, broken spoke. 9 broken spokes in total. So he spent all his time at bike shops, rolling his bike up and like, can you guys, rebuild my wheels, and fixing all the broken spokes. And that can just make your life a misery. So I was thinking, as I was watching his video, it's like, man, he did everything wrong in terms of the gear he was using. Everything he bought was too cheap. It's not strong enough. His camera mounts all broke, his bicycle broke, everything broke and was just not working properly. Nothing was good enough. And his mental attitude was all wrong as well. For one thing, he wanted to get all the way to Hanoi in 2 months, which means basically cycling like every single day. And he was trying to do 100, 150 kilometers every single day right from the beginning, which again is a terrible mistake because you just can't do that. You have to start slowly. And he also, all of his language struck me as wrong, like he was in the wrong mindset for cycling, because he saw the cycling as something to get over with. So he would start the day and he would set himself up for failure from the very beginning, because he would say, okay, I want to cycle from A to B. So I want to ride 150 kilometers. He would set himself a goal to get to that point. And everything in his brain was focused on getting there. And again, that's just setting yourself up for failure, because he would come across a big hill, like a big long climb, And it's like, oh, a hill. Now I'm going to go slower. It's going to take me longer to get to that town. And then now he's riding up the hill. He's like, oh, I hate this. Oh, it's so steep. It's so much work. And he gets to the top, and then you coast down. And then there's another hill down. And you can't think of it that way, because now you're fighting. Basically, as I've talked about many times, when you're riding a bicycle, well, you soon discover that every single road in the whole world is always going up or down. There's no such thing as a flat road. Even in Canada, I rode my bike one time across Canada, and we have an area in Canada, the prairies, which are famous for being hundreds and hundreds of kilometers that are perfectly flat. But that's from the point of view of a car. You get on your bike, a pedal bike, ride across the prairies, and you're going up and down all the time. It's gradual, but you're always going up or down. So you're always climbing. That's what cycling is. Same thing with wind. You're always cycling against the wind. That's just the way it is. It's always hot. It's always raining. So you cannot set yourself up to fight against any of those things. That is just cycling. So instead, what you have to do is just enjoy the moment. So all you're doing is enjoying the world around you, and then you're turning the pedals. And what you do on a bicycle is you try to have the same cadence. So the cadence being how quickly you're turning the pedals. So you're riding along a relatively flat section, and you're turning the pedals like this, and maybe you're going 15 kilometers an hour. And then you come to a hill, and you drop down into a lower gear. Your cadence stays the same. So you're still pedaling, but because you're in a lower gear, you're now going 5 kilometers an hour, and you're going uphill. So all you're doing is pedaling, and then you're going slower and faster, and then there's a wind hitting you, a powerful wind, so you drop down into a lower gear to give yourself more torque, but your cadence stays the same, and then you're just riding your bike. And then you ride as far as you feel like riding, enjoying the world around you, enjoying all the advantages of being on a bicycle. There are lots of advantages. And then if you see something interesting, or you pass through an interesting looking village, and maybe they have a place where you can stay, stop for the day. Enjoy that place. If they have a nice little hotel, get a room at the hotel. Maybe you only rode 40 kilometers that day, right? There's no such thing as only 40 kilometers. That's just what you wanted to do that day. And you spend the night in that hotel, and then you enjoy your time in that village, and then you wake up the next morning and you're riding your bike, and you're just enjoying where you are. You have to really be in the moment. But if you say to yourself, well, I'm going to ride 150 kilometers today and I'm going to reach that town. If you don't reach that town, suddenly I failed. Now everything is a failure. You didn't make it to that town, so you failed. Climbing up a hill is tiring. You're trying to go fast. So your mindset is completely wrong. And by the time Harry got to Hanoi, he made it all the way to Hanoi, he was miserable the whole time. He was questioning. He wanted to give up the entire time. So the whole thing was torture for him, because his bike broke down constantly, and he was physically and mentally beaten down by how difficult it was. And yeah, so his mental approach to cycling was just completely wrong. But at the same time, I have to say that he also had bad luck. I've never seen so much terrible weather. It looked like it rained on him all the time. He was riding in the rain constantly, just rain, 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 rain all the time when he was in Vietnam. So he went at the wrong time of year, I guess, and he had very, very bad luck. So in my case, if I were riding my bike at that time and it rained that often, personally, I would just stop riding, because I'm not out there to be miserable, and I'm not trying to prove how tough I am. I'm riding the bicycle because it's enjoyable. And if it stops being enjoyable because it's raining every single day, then I stop riding the bike. I'm going to stay, if I'm in a nice, interesting town, in an inexpensive hotel, I'll just stay there. If it rains every day for a week, I stay there for a week. So, like, you see what I mean? For me, a bicycle is just transportation. And if that form of transportation stops making sense, I just don't do it anymore. But Harry's attitude was more like an accomplishment. I'm going to ride my bike all the way to Hanoi. And it's like a challenge, a physical challenge. And it just completely destroyed him. And I don't think he'll ever ride a bike again in his life, because this was such an unpleasant experience. But anyway, when I was rereading my journals, as I said, from the Philippines and Cambodia, now I could sort of cringe a little bit, because I did so many of the same things that he did, or I had so many of the same experiences, mainly because my bicycle and my gear was inappropriate. And I still had a really good time. But anyway, so that was the story of Harry and We Hate the Cold. Oh, one thing I noticed, which is quite interesting, I'm watching the video, and then he had a lot of trouble with his camera. He had a Sony X3000, and his camera mount kept breaking, so the camera would smash to the ground, and the lens kept getting scratched. And the camera never really worked that well. It was always foggy, covered in dirt, covered in mud, and the video never looked good. It was never in focus. The audio was terrible. It was very low quality because of his camera and how he was treating his camera. So it got worse and worse and worse. And then suddenly, the video looked really good. Just like changed instantly. It was like, whoa. The video was really sharp, really clear, vibrant colors. It was like, what happened? So I figured, I think he did mention that his X3000 broke. Like it fell down one more time and the lens got scratched so badly, he said it just was unusable. So I just assumed he was taking video with his smartphone. But there was something about it. I recognized the look of the video. It had a certain look to it. And I thought, you know what? I think he's got an action camera now. And then one day, as he's riding his bike shooting video, he went by a mirror, and then he stopped in front of the mirror to film himself. And I saw he was holding an action camera. And I'm not entirely positive, but I'm pretty sure it was a DJI Action 4. Not the new one, not the DJI Action 5 Pro, but the Action 4. And I think he bought it to replace, and that's why the video suddenly looked clear and sharp and colorful. And it had that certain look. Different cameras have a bit of a look to them, and when I saw his video, the first thing I thought was, oh, that looks like a DJI. That video looks like a DJI Action video. And it turns out I was right about that. But he doesn't talk about that either. So I don't know where he bought it, how he bought it, how he decided on that camera, how much he paid. Like, did he have enough money to buy a camera? Because he seems to be on a very tight budget. So, but that's kind of interesting as well. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen next. I was hoping that he would post like 10 videos, 20 videos from Vietnam, but he only posted one, like an hour, 45-minute long documentary. So that's kind of disappointing to me, because we had to wait like a month and a half for him to edit this one video. So The next video, who knows how long it's going to take until we see his next one. And I don't know where he's going after Vietnam. I assume he's going to get his scooter back again. But in order to get his scooter, he's going to have to fly all the way back to Bangkok. So basically start all over again. So how in the world is his journey going to continue? So it's all kind of, I can kind of relate to that because a lot of my journeys get mixed up that way as well. Anyway. So that was We Hate the Cold in Vietnam. I'm also still following Noraly on the Itchy Boots channel, of course. And I watched 2 of her latest videos. One of them was called Leaving Iraq Doesn't Go According to Plan. That is Season 8, Episode 24. And then the next one, it's called They Are Wild, Smugglers at Iraq-Iran Border, Season 8, Episode 25. And these 2 videos are from the same day, but she cut it into 2 parts because she really tries to keep all her videos like 20 minutes long, 20 to 25 minutes long. So this particular day was quite a long one for her, and she divided it into 2 parts. And the first one is really kind of interesting. This was right after her motorcycle was stolen in the town of Erbil. And then she had to spend some time there because they cut the wires on her motorbike. And she had to get it fixed. Well, she fixed it herself and had to adjust her plans. So these 2 videos pick up right after that experience. And she had to do something very annoying for her and very strange because she was in Iraq and she had a visa of some kind that allowed her to go into Iraq and through the region that they call Kurdistan. But that visa does not allow her to go into Baghdad, which I guess, I don't know what's going on in Iraq. But Iraq has a weird situation right now with different regions. I guess Baghdad is federal Iraq, and you need a different visa to get into that part. Anyway, so I assume she did all the research and she knew what was going on. So what she had to do was cycle through Iraq, then leave Iraq, go into Iran, be in Iran for a day, turn around, and then go back into Iraq with a new visa. I don't know whether she gets the visa at the border, or I assume she has to get it in advance. Iran, Iraq, they don't seem like countries where they just sort of stamp you in at the border. This is not Malaysia or Indonesia, very different countries in terms of welcoming foreign visitors. So that's what she did in these 2 videos. She rode across the border into Iran, and then she's going to turn around and go back into Iraq. And it was quite funny. Funny. It's amusing for me because I could relate to it. She was having a lot of trouble, I think mentally, physically, emotionally. Her experience of having her motorcycle stolen really hit hard. And as I've learned in my life, with a lot of anecdotal evidence, your mental state affects your physical state. So if I'm feeling really stressed out, frustrated, upset, or something, it affects my immune system, and that's when I get sick. So Itchy Boots, she had her motorcycle stolen, a very stressful time for her, and then she came down with a cold and she lost her voice. She couldn't speak at all. She completely lost her voice. It just croaking almost. It was really, really bad. And because she was so involved in the theft of the motorcycle and fixing it, her brain, she was talking about how she wasn't thinking clearly. She just wasn't on top of her game. So she left from the hotel. I don't know whether it was in this video or even the one before it, but I noticed this as well. A difference between her and me is that she went out to her motorbike in the morning, loaded everything up, got everything ready to go. Her day was planned, and then the motorcycle wouldn't start. She thought she'd fixed everything, to the point that she could just start it by kick-starting it, but she couldn't get it to start, kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking, and she could not get it to start. So she had to unload everything, take the whole motorcycle apart, get out her tools, and then work on the motorbike. I don't know how long this took, a couple of hours probably. And then she finally managed to fix the problem, or maybe she didn't fix the problem, but anyway, afterwards, she did manage to get the motorcycle started. And I say that there's a difference between us, because if I were in her itchy boots and I went out to the motorcycle and it wouldn't start and it took me 2 hours to get it started, I'm done for the day. My day is over. I would go back into the hotel, check in for another night and say, okay, yeah, I'm staying here for the day, because my day is done. But she's much tougher than I am. And after she worked on the motorbike all morning long, finally got it started, then she still loaded up her motorcycle, put all her luggage on it, and set off for the day. And of course, I would never do that. Same with Harry. And like Harry, if he woke up in the morning and it was pouring rain, he still got on his bike and he went riding. And I look out the window, it's pouring rain. I'm like, it's almost like, yes, cup of coffee. I get to hang out in this amazing town for another day and enjoy myself. Yeah, but anyway, they are both tougher than I am. So there's Itchy Boots. She's on her motorcycle, gets to a major checkpoint, heading towards the border with Iran. And then the guards, of course, are like, passport, please. And then she's like patting herself. Okay, I'm back. I just had a typical Planet Doug episode because my GoPro overheated and shut down. So when I was going to fix my GoPro, I grabbed it off. I have it sitting on a chair on my bed, and then the things got a little bit wonky, and the tripod that I was using to mount the GoPro here hooked my coffee cup, and the coffee went flying all over the place. So I had to clean up all of the spilled coffee and then adjust the GoPro. This is the GoPro Hero 12, and inside the media mod with the Rode Wireless Go microphone attached to it. And I'm inside an air-conditioned room, but I am shooting in 4K, and with the GoPro just sort of sitting there, unmoving, without any airflow, and recording for long periods of time, it overheats and shuts down because I was recording with a battery inside, and the battery puts off a lot of heat, and then, yeah, the GoPro overheated and shut down. So what I've done now is I've taken the battery out, and now I'm running the GoPro off USB power. And I'm hoping that means it won't shut down anymore. I've also managed to lower the GoPro because it's kind of a funny thing that I think I have more GoPro gear than anyone on the planet. Like in terms of mounting apparatus, grips, microphones, everything you can imagine. I have a ton of gear with me, and yet despite all the gear that I have, I really struggle finding anything that's appropriate. I'm constantly attaching this to this. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. Either I buy all the wrong gear, or that's just the way it is. So in this case, for example, I've been using this tripod, which is like a hand grip combined with a tripod, and it extends a little bit like that. It's a very nice one, very, very handy. But because the GoPro is sitting on a chair on the bed with this, it ends up putting the GoPro quite high. So when I'm recording one of these behind the scenes videos, I found myself a little bit uncomfortable because rather than looking straight ahead, I had to look up because the GoPro was up here. So I was sort of looking up all the time, tilting my neck, and it just didn't feel right, and I would get tired. Anyway, I decided to try to figure something else out, and I rummaged through all of my bags, and I found another tiny little tripod-y thing that I have. So I lowered the GoPro by a few inches. So now it's a little bit more straight ahead of me, and this feels like a much more natural position. But anyway, hopefully this time the GoPro doesn't overheat. Yeah, for this kind of video, I definitely need a different camera. The GoPro is not suited to this, where you're recording in a dark environment indoors with a stationary camera. It's an action camera. It's not meant to be doing things like this. So yeah, it'd be nice to have something else, but yeah, the future. So I was telling the story of Itchy Boots, and she just fixed her whole motorcycle, got it ready to go, and then she set off, and she got to these border checkpoints, and they asked to see her passport. So she got out her documents pouch, and then she started flipping through it. She couldn't find her passport, and that's one of the reasons she calls her video "Things Didn't Go According to Plan," because she didn't have her passport. So now, after having her motorcycle stolen, trouble getting her motorcycle started, all these problems, and now she's at the border, and it's like, oh, for Pete's sake, where's my passport? She's going through all her bags. She's probably panicking at this point and can't find her passport. And the border guard was very, very kind to her. A lot of people are very, very kind to Noraly, I've noticed. And the border guard got on his phone and called her hotel and spoke to them and said, okay, yeah, we have this woman at the border. She was staying at your hotel last night. Did she by any chance leave her passport there? And it turns out that's what happened, that when Noraly checked in, the hotel asked to see her passport. She handed it over. She never got it back. And then with all the excitement of the motorcycle being stolen, fixing it, all that stuff going on, she totally forgot about that. And she just packed up in the morning and left and didn't get her passport back from the front desk. So now she had to turn around and ride her motorbike all the way back into town to go back to the hotel to get her passport. And then while she was there, the hotel clerk, who didn't speak English, he contacted like his son or nephew or somebody who did speak English, put this guy on FaceTime and had him talk to Noraly about the passport and about where she's going, everything like that. So Noraly is chatting with this guy over the phone, and then he happens to mention, oh, you're going to Iran. Do you have your hijab? Because in Iran, all women are required to wear the hijab. I guess I wasn't aware of the difference between Iraq and Iran. I'm not up to speed on any of these things. But apparently in Iraq, it was fine for her just to go around with bareheaded with her hair exposed. It was no problem there. But in Iran, it's the law that women have to be covered. So, and she knew this, but in all the excitement and in her brain fog, losing her voice, all the trouble she had, she just completely forgot. So now she had to ride all the way back to the town to get her passport, and then she had to go shopping to buy a hijab. And again, if this was me, of course, I'd ride my bicycle or my motorcycle all the way to the border. I realize I've forgotten my passport and I need to buy something in the town, and I turn around and go all the way back to town. I'm done for the day. It's like, all right, that's it. Like if I can't leave on time in the morning, like a smooth takeoff, I just take that as a sign that, okay, I'm supposed to spend another day here. I would just check back into the hotel, have a nice cup of coffee, record a video like this, tell the story, and then I would spend the day just exploring that town, doing something interesting, getting some good food, shopping for the hijab, getting it, telling that story, filming that experience, and then the next day I would wake up, get back on the motorbike and start all over again. But again, Noraly is either on a much tighter schedule or she's just a lot tougher than I am. despite all these troubles, she finally got her passport back, she got the hijab, then she turned around, and then went all the way back to the border to start the process all over again. And that's all in the first video, part 1. Part 2, she actually, I guess she didn't even spend the night in Iran, I don't think. I think after all this, all she did was ride into Iran, turn around, and then go to a different border crossing, and then go straight back into Iraq on the exact same day, which again, barring some sort of reason for needing to do it this way, I would never do that. Like if I had to cross the border from Iraq into Iran, that's enough for me. I mean, that would be a big, big event in my life, and I'm done for the day. I'd find a hotel, I'd spend the night, I'd spend several nights gearing up, because now you're gonna have to cross the border back into Iraq. And I knew, I would know that's going to be a challenge. So I would need to rest up to get ready for that challenge. But anyway, I think she just went into Iran, turned around, went back to the border again. And that experience is in her second video, the one that she calls They Are Wild, Smugglers at Iraq-Iran Border. And then she crossed the border, and it took her 3.5 hours to cross that border into Iraq. And it looked like or was that into Iran? I'm all mixed up now. That might have been the going into Iran. It took 3.5 hours. Anyway, I guess I wasn't paying that much attention, but anyway, one of those border crossings, either going into Iran or leaving Iran, took 3.5 hours. Maybe it was going into Iran. That makes the most sense. Yeah, that's what it was. She didn't actually cross back into Iraq. She just went into Iran. It took 3.5 hours, and from my perspective, watching the video, it was completely disorganized. And that always strikes me as weird when you cross a border. Like in her case, a lot of the borders that she crosses, it's not clear where to go because she has the motorcycle. She has more steps. It's not just passport, visa. It's passport, visa, but then customs for the motorcycle, carnet de passage for the motorcycle, insurance for the motorcycle, et cetera, licenses. It's much more complicated. She has to go to other buildings, and when she gets to these borders, it's just like no information, no signs, no flow. And in this case, it was like one of the worst I've ever seen, where she rode up on her motorcycle, and then all these men would come up to her motorcycle, and they're speaking in Iranian or in Iraqi, whatever language they were speaking. And she has no idea what they're saying, no idea what they're talking about, no idea what they're asking her. And then all she could do was just go where they pointed. A guy would just, that way, that way, that way. And she's like that way? Like, there's a whole bunch of buildings, like, which buildings? Like, that way, that way. So she goes off in that direction very slowly on her motorcycle. And as she gets near that area, she has to stop again and just sort of wait for somebody else to, that way, that way, that way. And everybody's just pointing. And she has no idea where she's going, why she's going there, what they're asking for. It must be absolutely exhausting. And all she does basically is go where they tell her, hand over whatever it is they ask for, go into the building if they say, go somewhere else if they say, sign what they say, pay what they say, fill out whatever forms they put in front of her. And of course, she didn't itemize everything that happened, but it looked absolutely exhausting, and took her 3.5 hours to get across that border into Iran, which makes a lot of sense. And again, that might be another difference between me and tough people, because I just wouldn't do it. Where if a country makes it that difficult for you to get into the country, clearly they don't want you there. And I would just sort of mentally think, well, then I'm not going to go there. You don't want me in your country. Well, that's fine. I'll go to another country. And yeah, it's not like the world is lacking in interesting countries. There are lots of interesting countries where they actually want you to come and visit. So, you know, I'm not eager to go to the ones that make it difficult for you to get in. But of course, in her case, I mean, a lot of people go to Iran on bicycle tours and they rave about it, not because of the border crossing or the government or the police or the military. They rave about it because the people in Iran are so friendly and so welcoming and so hospitable. So, but anyway, in terms of the title of the video, she's talking about smugglers, and these are gasoline smugglers on motorcycles. And apparently because of the cost of gas in one country versus the other, I assume it's cheaper in one, so they make a living by, they put these big steel cases, like racks, big steel racks on their motorcycles, specially designed to hold gas cans, and then they pile in as many cans, as many containers of gasoline as their motorcycle can carry. And then apparently they cover their face. Maybe, I mean, it's illegal technically, but the authorities turn a blind eye and pretend it's not happening. Everybody knows what they're doing, but apparently they basically buy gas in one country, ride across the border, sell the gas, come back, get money. They just go back and forth all day long, smuggling gas and making money that way. And of course, that's illegal. Try to do that in Indonesia, they'll quickly put a stop to it. They don't even let you bring your phone into the country because they're so worried that you might sell it and make a profit, avoiding customs and duties and taxes and things like that. But it would be nice. It would be interesting to get more of that story. But like Noraly doesn't have access to all the details. But it would be nice to know more about those gas smugglers, how much money they make, how it works with the authorities, things like that. The other interesting thing about her story is that when her motorcycle was stolen, and then she discovered that the thieves cut all the wires, she had to rewire her motorcycle. And then what she was doing, she figured out a way that she could just start the motorcycle, but then when she wanted to stop it, she would take these wires and unplug them. And by disconnecting two wires, the motorcycle would stop. And then when she wanted to start again, she'd have to reconnect the wires, kickstart, and start the bike again. And then when she was talking about that in the first video about her motorcycle being stolen and then about fixing it, there were, I don't know, there are so many comments on her videos. It may not be an exaggeration to say that there were 1,000 comments telling her that it's much easier to just stall the motorcycle. Like, because everybody saw her, like all these people that are motorcycle experts, they're a big part of her audience. They're watching her disconnect the wire, reconnect, disconnect, reconnect, and everybody was telling her, probably 1,000 comments telling her, you don't need to do that. All you need to do is have the motorcycle in third gear or something, and then don't give it any gas and engage the clutch, and the motorcycle will stall. All you have to do is stall the motorcycle and it will shut off. So you don't need to do this wire nonsense. And I was wondering about that because I don't know. I don't know what's real and what isn't. I don't know who's telling the truth here. And I was assuming that Noraly was ignoring all this advice because she knew better, that there was some reason that on her 1987 Tenerife Yamaha motorcycle, there was something about that motorbike where the wire business was better. I figured she must have had a reason, and I was waiting for her to maybe talk about this. But it turns out that everybody who said this was right. But because of the timing of the videos, it was too late, because she posted the videos much, much later. So all of this was happening in 2 or 3 days. But when she edited and posted the video was weeks later in the future. So everybody giving her advice on what she should and shouldn't do, it was all kind of useless information. And in this video, when she's crossing the border, she was actually, at one point, came up to, like in the border crossing, she had to go to so many buildings, and she was like unplugging the wire, plugging, unplugging, plugging. Then she went up to one building, and they told her, oh, we need to see your documents, you need to come in, you need to do something. So she knew she had to turn off her motorcycle, and just by accident, she stalled it, and the motorcycle turned off. And then the light bulb went off. She was like, I don't have to disconnect the wires every time I need to shut off the motorcycle. All I need to do is stall it deliberately. So she figured it out on her own. And then when she was talking on the video in a kind of epilogue, she was talking about this, and she said, I think she said, and I knew this. I knew that I could stall the motorcycle to stop it. Like, I'm experienced enough on motorcycles that I know this, but for some reason, it never occurred to me. She just she was suffering from brain fog because of how tired she was, how stressed out she was, losing her voice, all these things. And even though she knew she could do this, it just never occurred to her. So all that time she was attaching the wire, disconnecting the wire, and then almost by accident, she discovered, I can stall it. So it turns out these 1,000 men around the world who were telling her that that's what she should do, it turns out all of them were right. But Itchy Boots, Noraly, she discovered this on her own, like earlier, before anybody left these comments. So yeah, it must be really weird to be doing a Moto vlog like that, where you're dealing with mechanical problems, and then you're facing a mechanical problem in the video, and then all these motorcycle experts around the world are telling her how to fix it. Do this, do that, buy this tool, you just need to do this. All these helpful people giving good advice. It's all pretty much useless, because this is all happening in the past anyway, and all this advice. By the time Noraly sees these comments, she's already fixed the problem anyway. So yeah, as a YouTuber like her, you live in a kind of weird time loop, kind of a weird, your own timeline, basically. So far, so good with the GoPro not overheating, though when I touch it, I can feel a lot of heat, even though there's no battery in it anymore, and I've just plugged into USB-C power. That's one thing about the GoPro Media Mod that a lot of people overlook, where the Media Mod rightfully comes in for a lot of criticism based on its poor design, but it also allows you to do a few things that people never mention. One being you can just plug in a USB-C power source and run the GoPro off of that instead of from a battery. So it's one thing the Media Mod can do. So the other YouTuber that I'm following pretty steadily now is Eric from Canada. His YouTube channel is called Moto, and he has set off to ride a motorcycle or kind of around the world in what he calls a spiral, starting from Prudhoe Bay in Alaska and then riding across North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, and then New Zealand. And it's kind of funny when I watch his videos, though, because he's very organized, and he's using Noraly and Itchy Boots as his model. So he's sort of using her as a guide for what he does in terms of how he makes his videos, how he organizes them. So he's following her pattern, but adjusting it a little bit. Like Itchy Boots does seasons. She treats her videos like they're a travel show on network television, basically. So she has like season 1, episode 1, season 1, episode 2, etc. Then the next trip will be season 2. And then Eric from Moto, he calls his acts. So like a play, act 1, act 2. But as he's applying all these labels, you can tell it gets a little bit confusing, because in his mind, the journey is beginning in Alaska. He wants to start at the most northerly point of North America and then ride all the way down to the most southerly point of New Zealand, north to south. So in his mind, his journey isn't beginning until he's in Alaska, but he has to get to Alaska first. So he documented his entire ride from Vancouver to Alaska and then down again. So he's going up to Alaska, then down from Alaska. But anyway, so even though in his mind his journey hasn't even begun yet, Act 1 is getting to Alaska. And now, anyway, so you see what I mean? The language gets really, really confusing. And in this video, he's talking about how, okay, now the next video will be the beginning of Act 2. But then he realized, well, I'm not actually leaving yet. I'm going to stay in Prudhoe Bay in Alaska for a little bit and go on some kind of a tour or something. So the first video is the beginning of Act 2, but it's not really the beginning of Act 2 yet, because I'm doing, so he gets, and I can kind of relate to that, because I like to organize things. And sometimes the more organization you put into something, the more difficult it becomes, because now you're dividing things up into categories, and sometimes things don't fall into neat categories the way you like. And anyway, I could kind of relate to that when I was listening to Eric. But anyway, in his latest videos, Eric was riding through Alaska to Prudhoe Bay. And a few things I noticed in his videos. One is how many people are doing the same thing. So as he's riding up the road to the most northerly point, he comes across so many other people doing exactly the same thing. And they're either on a bicycle or on a motorcycle or in like Land Rover, 4-wheel drive expeditions. And all these people are doing the exact same thing that everybody else is doing, where they start from like the tip of South America and they're riding all the way to the tip of North America, south to north. Or they're going in the opposite direction. They're starting at the northern tip of North America and they're going to ride all the way down to the southern tip of South America. And he meets so many people doing the same thing. And Noraly did exactly the same thing for Itchy Boots on her motorcycle, starting in the tip of South America, heading all the way north to the northern tip of North America. And I think about that all the time, because it's such a natural thing for a human being to do. And I've talked about this a lot, where people are sitting in their home and they have this dream that they want to go traveling, and they instinctively decide, well, I'm going to go around the world. Like, we have this human instinct where we need to structure something, and a natural structure is to incorporate extremes. So they go from the extreme north to the extreme south, or the extreme east to the extreme west, and then they build their journey on this structure, on this skeleton of extremes. And I often think that this may not be the best way to go about it, because then you end up drawing a straight line from one to the other, and you end up missing so many things around you because you're so focused on this one single line, this artificial line that you've drawn through a continent or around the world. And yeah, I think about that all the time. So like in his case, I mean, I get it. It's also very good for marketing. He's trying to sell his YouTube channel to make money from it, of course. He needs money to fund his journey. And other people who aren't traveling, they can relate to that. They love to see, like even Harry, when he gave the title to his video, cycling from Bangkok to Hanoi, he puts solo in the title. And that's another pet peeve of mine. It's kind of talking about I'm doing it solo. And it's not such a big deal because everybody is solo eventually. Anyway. But because he packages his journey as going around the world, or somebody packages their journey, the extreme north to the extreme south, or vice versa, it attracts an audience. But in the end, I don't know that it's the best travel experience, because by drawing that straight line through Alaska, like, is Prudhoe Bay the best place to go? Is it the most beautiful place to go? Is it the most interesting place to go? Sure, it's the most extreme northerly point, but maybe there's a place over here in Alaska that is more interesting, more beautiful, that nobody else goes to. Like, you're doing the exact same thing that everybody else is doing, so why not? It's kind of weird in a way to think about it, that something like going all the way from the southern tip of South America to the northern tip of North America, in the old days, that would be an extreme adventure that nobody else is doing. But so many people have the money and the time to go traveling these days that an extreme adventure like that is actually commonplace. So many people are doing it. It's like a migration route from, I don't know how to pronounce the name of it, Ushuaia, the southern tip of South America in Argentina, from there to Prudhoe Bay. It's like a highway. So many people are making that journey. The same thing in Africa. Everybody that goes to Africa goes Cairo to Cape Town to Cairo. It's like a migration of backpackers, of cyclists, of motorcyclists. So in a way, if you want to do something unusual that nobody else is doing, well, don't go to those geographical extremes. Look on Alaska, and where's the most beautiful part of Alaska, the most interesting part? Go there instead, because nobody else is going there, if you see what I mean. And I think you'd end up having a better travel experience anyway. And I've noticed, I've been following a lot of these Moto vloggers in particular. There's Kriko's Adventure, and she recently went through Iran, I think, and now is exiting the border recently. But because she was so hyper-focused on getting through Iran, through Iran, a lot of people who live in Iran were leaving comments on her video saying, you missed so much of our country. You just went zoom from border to border. Well, why didn't you go here? And why didn't you go there? And here and here. So it would have been much better to go to Iran and do kind of a, travel around the country, see all the different regions of Iran, instead of going straight for the border, because then your journey becomes nothing but straight lines and border crossings. A new visa, a new visa, a new visa, another border crossing, changing money, border crossing. And after a while, you have to think, is that the best way to spend your time? Really, if you want to travel the world, why not go to one country, spend a lot of time inside that one country and really explore it, rather than trying to go to 70 countries in one straight line, because then all you're doing is crossing borders. So anyway, when I was watching Eric's video, that's what I ended up thinking about. But at the same time, he got to talk to a lot of people. All these other people that are going north to south on their motorcycles or bicycles or whatever they're doing, he got to talk to them, chat with them, exchange stories. It's like a community now of people that make that journey. And that was something I noticed in my journals from the Philippines in particular. Not so much, Cambodia. Yeah, Cambodia too, now that I think about it. In my journals from those days, I seemed to meet a lot of people, talk to a lot of people everywhere I went. I would meet other travelers, other foreigners from North America or from Europe in particular, people who spoke English, and then I would record in my journal all these conversations. I learned all these interesting things about all these people that I met. I would meet people. I met this woman from Germany when I was in this town, Port Barton, on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. And we just happened to meet by accident. We were both eating in this same restaurant. And she was having a meal with this American guy. And the American guy and I were talking. And then the American guy says, oh, Doug, meet Yvonne. Yvonne, meet Doug. And then Yvonne and I, this woman from Germany, she was traveling as a backpacker. We just ended up spending several days together. It's like, because I wanted to go to this waterfall. And I would say to her, oh, do you want to go there? And we would walk there together. And the next day I wanted to take a boat to go into these mangrove swamps. And we would do that together. And I remembered that all of my trips in the past consisted of that. I met so many people. I met these three guys from like Germany and Sweden and Norway. And the three of us went to this place, Sabang, and they have this underground river. And we did a hike on the monkey trail to the underground river because we met the day before and we decided to do this thing together. And I realized recent trips that I go on, that never happens anymore. I meet a lot of local people from that country, but I'm not meeting backpackers. I'm not meeting other cyclists, moto vloggers, like people traveling on motorcycles, on bicycles, with backpacks. I don't have that experience anymore. I never meet other people on the road, and we don't join forces and travel together anymore. And I don't know whether that's because I've changed, the world has changed. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. It was just something I was thinking about. So far, no overheating GoPro, so I'm taking a chance on another cup of coffee. The problem here is my room again, this low-budget room. I just have no convenient place, so there's no place to put my coffee. There's no bedside table, so I end up putting it on the chair, and the chair is like, oh, it's a chair, so it's actually curved. So you have to balance everything, and I've got my GoPro on the chair as well. And if I move on the bed, the mattress, it rocks. Planet Doug Studios, it's a very precarious operation. And I said earlier that I seem to have more GoPro-related camera gear than anyone on the planet. And yet I always find there's something else I need. So I don't know how it is I can have more gear than anybody, and yet I never seem to have the right gear. So lately, I've had this really strong need for long USB-C cables because I'm constantly trying to plug things in that are far away. And none of my USB-C to USB-C charging cables, none of them are long enough. And it's like, okay, now more gear I need to buy, to research, to shop for, to spend money on. It's just, I don't know what it is about my life. But it seems to be very complicated as far as technology goes. And yet right now I'm shooting with one camera. I only have the GoPro Hero 12 that I'm using regularly these days. And yet I have a support system of gear for that camera like nobody else on the planet. It's pretty funny. So in these podcasts, these behind-the-scenes videos, I've been talking for the longest time, mainly about Patreon, technology, and YouTube stories, and I've been neglecting some other areas of my life because I keep running out of time. So today I'm not going to skip the podcast and the pop culture segments. I really want to talk about those at least a little bit, and maybe in the future I can shorten all of these sections a little bit to make sure I cover all of them. And in terms of podcasts, the most interesting one, the one that has been rattling around my brain, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but this one was called, it's from Freakonomics, but it's not actually an episode of Freakonomics. It's like a guest episode from another podcast called People I Mostly Admire. So, People I Mostly Admire is a podcast done by Steve Levitt, and Steve Levitt was one of the founders of Freakonomics, but he kind of does his own podcast now called People I Mostly Admire. He interviews interesting people, and in this case, Steve Levitt interviews a man from the United States called David Eagleman, and I've got a bit of a biography of David Eagleman here. He was born on April 25th, 1971. So, and he's an American neuroscientist, author, and science communicator. So in my mind, he falls into sort of that category of academics that popularize their subject matter. So he is a neuroscientist, but he's published a lot of books that are geared towards a general audience. And he's also the CEO and co-founder of a company called Neosensory, and they develop products for what is called sensory substitution. And all of this will make sense in a minute as I talk about the podcast. So basically, as a neuroscientist, he talks about the brain. He's interested in the brain. And of course, I think all of us are interested in the brain, but I've always had a particular fascination with it. And in this interview, he talks about the brain in a way that makes sense to me, in a way that I've also thought about it. Like when you think about it, my brain is in here, inside this skull, and inside the skull, it's completely black. Right? It's dark. So the brain sits in darkness. No light gets there. No sound gets there. No sensation ever reaches the brain. It lives in this isolation tank, floating in fluid inside my skull. And what the brain does is it takes electrical signals. So all these electrical signals pour into the brain, and then the brain changes it into something else. So it basically takes all this electrical input and interprets it. And then when we as babies are growing, our brains are basically training itself to interpret the input and creating something else out of it. So in this case, this is mainly about audio. I think he's talking a lot about sound and audio. So basically we have ears, and there's a membrane in our ear, and when a sound wave, like when you think about it, just heard a motorcycle go by, and we have grown up with sound that we think sound exists. We think of sound as something, like a physical something that you can look at and say, oh, here is sound. But really, sound is not anything real. Our brain creates sound, and it creates sound out of waves of vibration. So when that motorcycle goes by, the engine is exploding, like the pistons in the cylinders, but making all these explosions, and it's sending a shock wave. It's essentially a shock wave of energy moving through the air, and then that shock wave makes our inner ear vibrate. That vibration is turned into electricity. The electricity travels into our brain, and our brain creates sound. So if you see what I mean, we have spent our entire lives absorbing shock waves, and our brain converts those, well, our ear converts the shock waves into an electrical signal, and then our brain converts that electrical signal into sound for us. So I find that really quite a fascinating idea. And in this podcast, he talks a lot about people who are deaf. So, and basically, if you are deaf, it doesn't mean you can't hear sound, right? Because sound itself, in my mind anyway, I think of it as an illusion. Everything is an illusion because it's something that our brain creates. So it's not like a deaf person can't hear sound. All that happens to them is that their ear isn't working, and it isn't sending the electrical signal to the brain. So a shock wave hits me, my ear turns it into electricity, and my brain translates that electricity. But a deaf person, their ear isn't working, and it doesn't send the electrical signal to the brain. But that deaf person is still being affected by the shock wave. There goes another motorcycle. That shock wave is hitting my body. So it's hitting my ear, but it's also hitting my nose. It's hitting my chest. It's hitting my legs. That shock wave is hitting my entire body. But even though the shock wave is hitting my nose has no mechanism to deal with it. Only my ears convert the shock wave into electricity. I mean, you know, our body can feel shock waves. Like if the shock wave was larger, say there was an explosion outside and there's a shock wave, it hits your body, you feel the shock wave. You hear the sound because your ears absorb the shock wave, but you can actually feel the shock wave over your whole body, right? It's not isolated to your ears. So what this guy, David Eagleman, what he is studying and what his company ended up producing was they started with a vest. So they created a vest, and the vest has electronics built into it, and the vest absorbs the shock waves traveling through the air, converts it into a vibration inside the vest. So the deaf person, or any person you put on the vest, you would feel a vibration against your skin. And that vibration, because you have neurons in your skin, converts that vibration into an electrical signal, right? A signal of sensation, a physical sensation that travels to your brain, and your brain registers that vibration. Are you with me? This is just such an amazing concept when you think about it. So you've got me, say, and a deaf person. We're both sitting in this room. A motorcycle goes by, the shock wave of the engine hits my ears, sends an electrical signal to my brain, and my brain converts it into something we call sound. The deaf person wearing the vest, the same shock wave hits the vest, vibrates something maybe right here on the rib cage. That sensation, electrical signal, travels up to their brain, and they're aware of it. But for them, it isn't sound yet. It's exactly, like what I'm saying is, it's exactly the same thing. My ears send an electrical signal to my brain. The deaf person, they feel something on their rib cage, sends an electrical signal to the brain. So what they have to do is train the brain to convert that physical sensation into sound. And this is something that just happens over time. They use the example of a dog barking, right? A dog barks, it creates a shock wave. I see the dog barking, the shock wave hits my ear, and then my brain, over time, associates what I see, the dog's mouth moving, with the shock wave and converts it into the sound of the dog barking. Now, a deaf person wearing this vest sees the dog barking, the shock wave hits the vest, creates a vibration up here, that vibration goes to the brain. And over time, the deaf person, their brain starts thinking about, oh, that's sound. That dog doing this created this vibration, and then the brain starts to create the sensation of sound to go along with it. So even though their ears don't work, they still get an electrical signal from their skin, and that electrical signal from the skin now in the brain is being converted into sound, into an audio signal. Do you see what I mean? So what I'm saying is sound doesn't exist. It's only in our heads. So how the signal gets to your brain doesn't matter. For most people, it comes from our ears. But if your ears don't work, you can wear this vest, and if you wear that vest for a long time, gradually your brain starts to take those signals and turn it into sound. So suddenly, the deaf person can hear almost the same way that we hear with our ears. So I find that absolutely fascinating. And then over time, this company, what was the name of his company again? David Eagleman's company is called Neosensory. So that is what I mentioned, sensory substitution. That's the idea here, that the sensation of vibration on your skin becomes a substitute for sound. So instead of the electrical signal from our inner ear, the deaf person gets an electrical signal from it substitutes their skin for our ear and creates the same sensation of sound. And they took this vest and they shrunk it down to a wristband. So now the new product they sell is actually a wristband. They have a name for it. I don't think I made a note about it. Yeah, I don't see it here. But they create a wristband that does the same thing as the vest, because our wrists are very, very sensitive, of course. And then every time there's a shock wave, something in the wristband will vibrate and then send a signal to the brain, and the brain starts to create a sensory, there's a word I'm looking for. Yeah, I can't think of it right now. But like at the very beginning, if someone has never used this wristband before, they put it on, a dog barks, and then something right here vibrates. So all they see is, oh, dog barking, little vibration right here. And that's all that happens. But then over time, the brain starts to associate the two together. And after a while, the deaf person doesn't feel vibration anymore. They hear sound. When the dog barks, they actually hear sound the same way we hear sound, but it's just coming from a different sensory organ. So the brain is intelligent enough to make the switch. So anyway, that is why this podcast made such a big impression on me, because I find that so fascinating. Because we all, as human beings, we think about reality. We think there is a reality out there, and sound exists, light exists. We think color exists. But of course, even color is something our brain created. Color isn't real. It's something that our brain creates to interpret the electrical signal that's coming from our eyes. Certain rods and cones get lit up by certain light frequencies, and then in order to distinguish between the different frequencies, our brain creates red, yellow, green, blue. But in nature, there are no colors. They don't actually exist. They're basically shock waves of light. They're basically light frequencies. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because there's all kinds of light frequencies that our eyes can't register. The infrared or ultraviolet, whatever, there's outside of our eyes have a certain range of light frequencies that we can absorb, but beyond that, above it and below it, our eyes can't process those signals. So technically there's all these other colors that we don't even see because our eyes can't register those. But they're not colors at all, they're just light frequencies, if you see what I mean. So I love this idea that we go around our day-to-day world thinking we live in this reality, when in fact all of the reality we see, hear, feel, taste, and smell is something that our brain creates. And once you grasp that concept, that the brain is only interpreting electrical signals, you come across this idea very quickly that, well, you could take an electrode, put it into the brain, send an electrical signal, and it would be exactly the same thing as what we think of as reality. The motorcycle goes by, creates a shock wave, hits my ear, electrical impulse goes into my brain, I hear sound. But if we had the technology, you could put an electrode into my brain, hit a button, and I'll hear a motor go by in exactly the same way. Because the reality is there is no sound. So you could actually take a human brain, disconnect it from all the sensory organs, disconnect our eyes, disconnect our ears, our mouth, tongue, nose, skin, disconnect all of that. And if we had the technology, you could actually recreate that with electrical signals from computers and create a completely different new reality. And it would feel in every way just as real as what I'm feeling around me right now. No difference at all. So that begs the question, like, what is real then? Is there a reality? So anyway, now you're getting into philosophy, I guess, or pseudo-philosophy, but I find that very interesting. So this podcast, well, I don't think I even said what it was called. The name of the podcast was Your Brain Doesn't Work the Way You Think. And that is episode 615. Oh, no, it isn't. I didn't write down the episode number. But anyway, you can go to Freakonomics, the website, and they have the podcast there, or go onto your podcast catcher, whatever you use. Look for Freakonomics, and it's called Your Brain Doesn't Work the Way You Think, an interview with David Eagleman. Yeah, David Eagleman, man, what a guy. I've lived a longer life than he has, and I really haven't done anything, but he's had the time to publish like 10 books. It's like, I don't even know how these people do it. It's enough for me just to get through a single day, go to work, make money, have lunch, have dinner, go home, go back to work, my whole life. And how in the world does he do all those things? You know, do laundry, clean the bathroom, clean the recycling, take out the garbage, go on a trip from time to time, take a few pictures, record a few podcasts, record a few videos. Meanwhile, this guy written all of those books, all of those accomplishments. Pretty crazy. But anyway, I don't know if I explained my thoughts very well there, but I just saw a sentence, a little note that I made, which kind of captures it, that the brain doesn't care where electrical signals come from. We think it does, but it doesn't. The electrical signal can come from your ear, or it could come from your skin. As far as the brain is concerned, it doesn't care. So it doesn't need the ear to hear sound. It can create sound out of any other electrical signal. It just needs to understand it and over time adjust to it. So yeah, so you put a wristband on, you get a sensation on your skin, your brain is perfectly happy with that. It can say, oh, that's sound, okay. And then it starts to create a soundscape. That's the word I was looking for earlier. So a deaf person using one of these wristbands creates a brand new soundscape of its own and creates sounds. And of course, we can never ever truly understand, like if a deaf person, say a baby is born and they know the baby is deaf, i.e. its ears don't work, right from birth, if they put one of these wristbands on the baby and it grows up with it, it sees its mother's mouth opening and closing, and it feels the vibrations, its brain will eventually convert that signal into sound, and it will hear its mother speaking in exactly the same way we hear it, just using a different organ, a different sensory input. But of course, we'll never truly understand what that baby is hearing, because clearly it's going to be hearing something a little bit different. And if it goes to a symphony orchestra and hears Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, what will that person be hearing through their wristband? It's a very interesting idea. I guess it depends on how sophisticated that wristband can be. So, but yeah, technically, the brain doesn't care where the electrical signals are coming from. And this gets to the last topic of interest to me in the podcast. They call it tinnitus. I've always said tinnitus, and tinnitus is that high-pitched whining sound. I have tinnitus. I can hear it right now if I stop speaking. I can hear this high-pitched whining sound, and it. Sometimes I hear it, sometimes I don't. Like sometimes I'm aware of it, sometimes I'm not. And lately, like if I'm really, really tired, it becomes more prominent. So basically, right now, I'm hearing a really loud, high-pitched whine. You know, I can hear it as clear as day. I can hear the scooters outside. I can hear my own voice. And I hear this high-pitched whining sound. It's quite loud, but it doesn't exist. It's only in my brain. So that's a clear example of how sound is an illusion. I'm hearing a sound that doesn't exist. My brain has created, for some reason, there's something wrong with my brain, and it has created this high-pitched whining sound that nothing is producing it. It's not coming from the computer, it's not coming from the air conditioner, the fan. Nothing is producing this sound, this shock wave, but I still hear it because my brain thinks it exists. So that's a very good example, tinnitus. And what they discovered is that this wristband can actually cure tinnitus because my brain thinks it's hearing this high-pitched whining sound. But if I put on this wristband, there's no input, there's no vibration, because that sound is not being created by anything in the real world. And they found that people who have severe tinnitus, they put on the wristband and they wear it long enough, their tinnitus lessens and eventually can even disappear, because the brain is hearing something, but it's not getting any sensory input from the wristband. So it goes, hey, wait a minute, where's that sound coming from? It's looking around your eyes, you're looking for something that is producing that sound, and your brain eventually realizes, oh, there's nothing out there making that sound, therefore that sound can't be real, and then your brain turns it off because it has no physical object to connect that sound to. You see the dog barking, its mouth moving, oh, sound. Okay, that's creating the sound. But I hear this whining, but there's nothing around me creating that sound, and I don't feel anything on my wristband, therefore it doesn't exist. It must be illusory, and my brain turns it off. So they found it actually can cure severe cases of tinnitus, which is kind of interesting. Well, I did say that I was going to talk about podcasts and popular culture, like TV shows and movies, but I think I've been talking long enough this morning, so I am going to once again postpone popular culture until the next podcast, and I'm going to try to balance this a lot better so that I can have all of my usual podcast components where I talk about Planet Doug, YouTube, technology, YouTubers, and podcasts, and pop culture, all the different topics I'd like to talk about. So I'm going to try and balance it a little bit better in the future. But for now, I think I've been talking long enough this morning, and I'm going to end it there, and I'll keep my pop culture topics for the next Planet Doug podcast. So thank you very much for hanging out with me, and I guess this... So thank you very much for hanging out with me, keeping me company, and I hope you enjoyed yourself a little bit listening to me babble on about the different things in my life. And if you did enjoy yourself, I hope you come back for the next podcast. And if you do come back, I'll talk to you then.